This is the BBC Third programme. To begin this evening, we're broadcasting the first of 7 Plato dialogues, which are to be given during the summer and autumn. We present Protagoras, an early dialogue given in outline only, in an unpublished translation by Francis Kinchin-Smith. Protagoras was a sophist, that is, a professional teacher. The ostensible subject of the dialogue, which is lightly satirical in tone, is whether virtue can be taught, in other words, moral philosophy. Socrates, his own narrator, tells how in the early hours of the morning he was awakened from sleep by his young friend Hippocrates.
Socrates, are you awake or asleep?
Is that you, Hippocrates?
Yes.
What brings you here at this hour? Have you some news?
Good news. Protagoras has arrived.
Oh? And what concern is that of yours? Has Protagoras done you a bad turn?
Yes, he has. By being the only wise man in the world and not making me one.
Well, you have only to win his confidence and pay his fee, and he'll make you wise too, eh?
If that were all that were needed, I wouldn't spare my pocket or anyone else's. My reason for coming to you now, Socrates, is to ask you if you will speak to Protagoras on my behalf.
Of course, of course.
I feel I'm too young to approach him myself.
Oh, come now.
Oh, let us go and call on him at once. Then we'll make sure of finding him in. I'm told he's staying with Callias.
Oh?
Oh, do come, please, now.
But tell me, Hippocrates, what do you hope to gain? If you wanted to consult your namesake, the great doctor, you'd do it, I take it, to get medical advice. Or if you wished to consult the sculptors, Phidias or Polyclitus, I presume it would be because you wish to become a sculptor. On what grounds, then, do you wish to consult Protagoras?
Because he is a sophist.
But do you want to be a sophist?
No, it's education I'm after.
And so you're going to submit your mind to... I don't believe you can tell me what exactly a sophist is.
One who has knowledge of wisdom. That means, I suppose, somebody wise enough to teach a pupil to converse well.
Yes, but to converse well about what? Do you realize the risk you're taking? If you were going to consult a doctor about your physical health, would you do it without first making careful inquiries? Surely in the case of your mind, my friend, don't risk your most precious possession on the toss of a coin. Buying ideas is far more risky than buying food. When you buy food and drink, you can take them home and examine them carefully before you touch them, with the help of an experienced friend, if you like. But ideas are different.
Yes, I suppose so.
When you've paid for them, you take them into your mind and go your way, incurring benefit or harm there and then.
Yes, I quite see what you mean, Socrates.
However, Hippocrates was determined to take the risk, and we set out for the house of Callias. As we were still arguing when we arrived, the doorkeeper thought we too were sophists, and slammed the door in our faces. In the end, we got in. Protagoras was walking round the courtyard with a large group of followers. In the opposite doorway, another sophist, Hippias, seated on a high chair, was delivering a lecture on astronomy, and yet another, Prodicus, smothered in blankets, was holding forth from his bed, but his deep voice made such an echo that his words were inaudible. The young and handsome Alcibiades joined the throng. I went up to Protagoras.
Good morning, Socrates. Who is your young friend?
His name is Hippocrates. He and I have come to see you, Protagoras.
Would you prefer to talk to me alone or in the presence of others?
As you like. My friend belongs to a well-known Athenian family and has political aspirations in this city. He thinks that if he puts himself under you, you can help him. But he would first like to know what benefit...
Young man, if you put yourself under me, you will go home a better man the first day you come. And on the second day you will be better still, and so on.
Indeed.
He will learn, Socrates, how best to manage his private life and how best the affairs of the city, both by his words and by his actions.
Do I understand you correctly, Protagoras? You mean that you teach the art of politics and undertake to make men good citizens?
Exactly. That is my profession.
That is indeed an achievement, if you really have achieved it.
If
I will be frank with you, Protagoras. I question whether citizenship is teachable or goodness. If you can show us more clearly that they are.
I will. But how would you like me to do it? Shall I, as an old man speaking to younger men, explain myself in the form of a fable, or shall I argue the question out?
Oh, whichever way you like, Protagoras.
I should prefer to tell you a fable.
Oh, very well.
Once upon a time, there were gods, but no mortal men. But when the time came that men should be created.
Protagoras told us a lengthy fable about the origin of man. When the human race seemed likely to be destroyed by the animal world, it appears that Zeus gave men a sense of justice and a conscience, so that he could build communities and defend himself. These gifts were imparted not to some individuals, like skill in particular arts, but to all mankind.
If a man pretends to be a good flute player when he is not, people ridicule him and become annoyed with him. But if honesty or any other civic virtue is the matter in question, it is when a man who is dishonest publicly admits it that they think him crazy. They maintain that every man must have some degree of honesty in him, or else he would not be a man at all. Now, let us see what light punishment throws on this. All punishment is based on the assumption that man can and should learn goodness. We don't punish a man out of revenge for a past wrong that cannot be undone. We think of the future. And our purpose is to deter the wrongdoer and those who see him punished from doing wrong again. We therefore believe goodness is teachable. Well, I've proved to you first that your countrymen are right in allowing any citizen, even a blacksmith or cobbler, to give advice on public matters. And in the second place,
Protagoras argued that a man's moral education begins in his cradle, that life is a continuous process of learning goodness, and that parents, nurses, schoolmasters, his country's laws, and society generally, all these play a part in forming a man's character. I asked why, if goodness can be taught, do good fathers so often have foolish and worthless sons? Why did the great statesman Pericles fail so completely in teaching his son wisdom, and so on?
virtue can be acquired by all, but only to the extent to which each individual is capable of acquiring it. As for your argument that there is no special class of teachers of goodness, well, I'd remind you that in Athens there is no special class of teachers of Greek either, because everyone teaches it by speaking it all day.
There, Socrates. What did I say?
Hippocrates, my boy, I am indeed glad you brought me here. I wouldn't have missed this magnificent speech for worlds. I used to believe that no human agency could make men good. Now, I know that I was wrong. But I have one small difficulty, which I'm sure Protagoras can easily remove.
Well, I shall try, of course.
Protagoras, I should be grateful if you would define virtue more precisely.
Yes, certainly.
What I should like to know is whether you regard it as a single thing, made up of goodness, good sense, and saintliness, each of these being different in themselves, or whether you regard these qualities as different names for the same thing.
Oh, well, that's simple, Socrates. Virtue is one thing, and these qualities are parts of it.
In the same way as the eyes, ears, and nose are parts of the face? Or are they parts, as one piece of gold is part of a nugget, the difference merely being one of size?
Well, I should say your first comparison, Socrates, is the correct one. They are like the parts of a face.
Can a man then have one of these parts of virtue without the others?
Well, of course. A courageous man is by no means always good, or a good man always wise.
Oh, courage and wisdom then are also parts of virtue.
Most certainly. And wisdom the greatest.
And they are all different from one another?
Yes,
Does each have a distinct function like the parts of a face?
it does indeed, Socrates.
No other part of virtue then is like knowledge or goodness or courage or good sense or saintliness?
That is so.
Then since goodness is a good thing, and saintliness is not like goodness, is saintliness a bad thing?
What?
Or again, since saintliness is a saintly thing, and goodness is not like saintliness, is goodness then an unsaintly thing?
Well, there's certainly a difference between them to me, but let us call them the same thing if you like.
Oh, no, Protagoras, I can't discuss this on the basis of if you like. I want to know what you really think without any ifs.
Well, obviously they have something in common. Everything in the world has some sort of resemblance to something, and even black and white, hard and soft, and other apparent opposites have something in common.
Do you think, then, that goodness and saintliness have only a small degree of likeness?
Certainly not.
Well, as you seem to find a difficulty here, let us take another example. Do you admit the existence of folly?
I do.
And is not the opposite of folly wisdom?
Yes.
Good. Now, when men act rightly and usefully, would you say that they were showing good sense?
I would.
And is it good sense that makes them act sensibly?
It is.
And those who do not act rightly act foolishly? And in so acting, they do not show good sense.
I agree.
Then, to act foolishly is the opposite of acting sensibly.
Yes.
And foolish actions are due to folly, and sensible actions due to good sense.
That is true.
Now tell me, is there such a thing as beauty?
Certainly.
Is its only opposite ugliness?
It is.
And is there such a thing as goodness?
There is.
Is its only opposite evil?
That is so.
Do you agree that every one thing has one opposite only and no more?
I do.
Then folly is the opposite of good sense.
Well, obviously.
Now, Protagoras, do you recall that we have already agreed that folly is the opposite of wisdom?
We have, Socrates.
And that a thing has only one opposite?
Yes.
But you have now admitted that folly, which is one thing, has two opposites, wisdom and good sense. Is that not so, Protagoras? Then good sense and wisdom are the same thing, just as we found goodness and saintliness to be almost the same.
Oh,
Come, Protagoras, we must pursue this argument to the end. Tell me, do you consider an unjust man to have good sense when he acts unjust?
no, really, I find this whole argument quite beside the point. Quite beside the point.
Protagoras began to get ruffled, and it was with some difficulty that his followers prevailed upon him to continue the discussion. He fell back on his favorite device of delivering a long speech, not much to the point, on the relativity of goodness, and concluded thus.
In the same way, Hippocrates, and the rest of you, manure is good for the roots of plants, but bad for their leaves. Olive oil is good for the skin, but bad for the digestion.
Well, Socrates?
Magnificent. But Protagoras, if I were deaf, I know you would accommodate me by speaking louder than your ordinary voice. In the same way, as my memory is bad, would you oblige me by shortening your answers that I may follow you better?
What do you mean by short answers? Do you want me to make them shorter than the subject demands?
Certainly not.
Are they then to be as long as I think they need to be, or as you think?
Protagoras, your reputation as a speechmaker is unquestioned. You are never at a loss for words.
I should hope not.
On the other hand, in brevity of expression, too, you can, when you wish, rival anybody. Will you please, then, when you talk to me, employ the latter method?
Socrates, I have fought many battles of words in my time. If I had followed the method of argument which my opponents wanted, and now you want, I should have been no better than anyone else, and the name of Protagoras would not be the name it is.
Well, I have an appointment elsewhere, so I must be off. I'm sorry. I should have liked to have heard you further, Protagoras.
Oh, we can't let you go, Socrates. There's nothing I like more than to hear you two arguing.
Oh, well...
And surely, Socrates, it's only fair to allow Protagoras the liberty which you take yourself of speaking as you like.
Alcibiades here intervened to say that the two cases were not parallel. I had admitted that I was no hand at making long speeches, if Protagoras would admit his inability to make short ones. Alcibiades proposed that we appoint an umpire. But who was this umpire to be? I suggested that we should question each other in turn. Protagoras reluctantly consented to begin. Being anxious to change the subject, he turned to literary criticism and said he would like to interrogate me on poetry. He took as his subject a passage in a poem of Simonides about the difficulty of being a good man. We became involved in the distinction between being a good man and becoming a good man, and I fear that I, too, was led to make a long speech.
Socrates, you've given us an excellent interpretation of the poem, but I have a better one of my own, which I would like to propound.
At some later time, perhaps.
I agree. Let Protagoras question or answer as he wishes. And let us go back to the matter we were discussing before. Men like ourselves do not need to drag in poets, any more than we would flute girls to entertain us. We have our own minds to supply us with material for discussion. But there, Protagoras, all I wish to achieve by means of this conversation with you is the attainment of truth by seeking it with the help of the wisest man I know.
Oh, well...
Will you not now answer my questions?
Oh, please.
Well, perhaps I...
Right. Then let us return to our original question, Protagoras. Are wisdom, good sense, courage, justice, and saintliness 5 names for the same thing, or does each have a distinct existence with its own special function? Your answer was that they are not different names of the same thing, but that each has a separate identity, and that they're all parts of virtue.
The baiting of Protagoras continued. Socrates trapped him into admitting first that wisdom and courage are identical, second that goodness is the same as pleasure and evil as pain. Admission by admission, Protagoras was seen to crumble.
The only thing that can save us is knowledge. Wrong choice is nothing but miscalculation, and wrong action is therefore due to error and is always involuntary. Doing evil arises from ignorance, doing good from knowledge. What light does this throw on the problem of courage?
Well, what light does it throw?
You have agreed that pleasure is good and pain bad, and that no one chooses evil and refuses good except through ignorance. Now, isn't there something you call fear? Isn't it something like an expectation of evil?
It is.
Now, on the lines of our previous argument, will any man pursue what he fears when he is not compelled to?
No.
Let Protagoras then justify his original statement when he said that 4 of the virtues were very like each other, but that the 5th, courage, was quite different. Did he not say that by the courageous he meant the daring? Protagoras, do you remember saying that?
I do.
Then tell me, what will the courageous man encounter? The same things as the coward?
Certainly not.
Will the coward encounter only what is safe, and the courageous man danger?
So men say.
They do. But do you say that the courageous man will go into danger knowing it to be dangerous?
No, your previous argument has shown this to be impossible.
It has. For if we have reasoned correctly, no man goes into what he knows to be danger, since to be overcome by oneself was found to be ignorance.
True.
But everyone, whether courageous or cowardly, is ready to encounter what he considers safe.
Yes, but what the coward goes to meet is the very opposite of what the courageous man goes to meet. The courageous man, for example, will go into battle. The coward will not.
Is going into battle a noble or an ignoble thing?
A noble thing.
And if noble, also good?
Certainly.
And if noble and good, then, by our admission, also pleasant?
Granted.
Are cowards, then, unwilling to go to what they know to be noble, good, and pleasant?
Well, to admit that would be to contradict our former admissions.
But does not the courageous man also go to meet what is nobler, better, and more pleasant?
I must admit this.
Does not shameful fear come from ignorance?
It does.
Then men are cowards through not knowing what is dangerous.
They are.
And what makes men cowards is cowardice?
Of course.
Then cowardice is the ignorance of what is and is not dangerous. Courage, being the contrary of cowardice, is the knowledge of what is and what is not dangerous. Why, Protagoras, do you neither agree with nor deny what I say?
Oh, finish the argument yourself.
Protagoras, there is one more question I must first ask you. Do you still think that there are men who are most ignorant and yet most courageous?
Oh, I see you're determined to make me answer, Socrates. So, to oblige you, I will say that, according to what we have already admitted, I don't see how there can be.
My sole motive in asking these questions has been the desire to discover the nature of virtue. For I am sure that if this were ascertained, the other question whether virtue can or cannot be taught would be solved too. Our discussion seems to me to have taken a whimsical turn. We seem to have changed sides in the course of it. If our discussion were personified, and if it were to speak with a human voice, it might be heard laughing at us with words such as these. What odd creatures you two are, Socrates and Protagoras. You, Socrates, who began by denying that virtue could be taught, have now contradicted yourself by attempting to prove that justice, good sense, courage, and the rest are knowledge, which would imply that virtue can be taught. For if virtue were something else than knowledge, as Protagoras tried to prove, it would obviously not be teachable. But if it is knowledge, as you say, Socrates, then it should certainly be teachable. You, Protagoras, on the other hand, began by saying that virtue could be taught, and now you admit that virtue is not knowledge and therefore unteachable. Well, Protagoras, seeing the confusion in which we are involved, I am most anxious to clear it up. I should like to start again, discussing first what virtue is, and only then whether or not it can be taught. Will you discuss this with me, Protagoras?
Socrates, I have nothing but admiration for your enthusiasm and your skill in conducting an argument. I don't think I am in other ways a bad man, and I am the last person in the world to be envious. You are cleverer than any of the young men of your generation, and I shouldn't be surprised if one day you became a famous philosopher. Let us return to the subject you suggest another time, but now other matters call me away.
Very well. And thank you, Protagoras. I, too, ought long ago to have kept the appointment I spoke of just now.
Goodbye, young man.
Goodbye, Protagoras.
Goodbye, Protagoras.
Protagoras was translated by the late Francis Kinchin Smith. The part of Socrates was played by Carlton Hobbs, of Protagoras by Felix Felton, and of Hippocrates by Charles Hodgson. The programme, which was recorded, was produced by Rainer Heppenstall.